I was listening to Alan Dershowitz's podcast, The Dersh Show, and I was struck by his approach. He didn't overly outline, let alone script. He just riffed, and he's got a good mind. I don't have a mind as good as Dershowitz's, but I thought I would try it as an experiment. I want to riff today on the thoughts about the war in light of Russia, the fact that 70% of suicides are white males and nobody knows about it or seems to care about it. The groupthink that scares me that is pervading society. A more, I think, realistic look at what's possible in relationships. The case against talking about your problems. Some armchair thoughts. I'm not an MD about COVID and its likely future. Work ethic, how to improve yours. The mistake of relying on others for praise. Some thoughts about meetings and the foolishness of many of them, including many strategic planning meetings, my utter failure at managing my weight, and my favorite drink, coffee, and why it's wonderful. There you go. So let's start. It's remarkable. Putin may win or lose. I'm certainly hoping he loses. We'll see whether, in fact, the collective approach of sanctions will work, or whether it just might makes right, which has unfortunately been proven time and time again. If the United States had not committed war against Britain, we'd probably still be paying the stamp tax and be loyal to the King of England. It took a revolution. If we in World War II had simply did as Neville Chamberlain said, sat aside and tried to negotiate with the Nazis, we'd probably right now be under a dictatorship under the era of Adolf Hitler. If blacks had not rioted, I don't think there would have been as much funding for blacks. So it's easy to nod about peace. That if only the Palestinians and the Israelis could hold hands and talk at the table and diplomatic solutions. But unfortunately, too often might does make right. Think about it. Are you more likely to change your behavior radically because somebody's going to chat with you, or at the threat of a gun to your head? And so much as I hate to think this way, I think that unfortunately violence works. And as a guy named Ernest Ray Mattoon, now dead, did his PhD dissertation at Berkeley on 2,000 years of history and what were the circumstances under which war occurred and peace, and he found that we were most likely to have peace when the countries were armed to the teeth, not when there was a lot of peace talking. Because, again, only when people were scared would they not be violent. And it's not you and me who are violent. It's the people who have the gluttony for power that rise to real power, that tend to be more likely to shunt aside alliances and conversations and meetings in favor of power. And that's why we've had everything from Attila the Hun to Hitler and to Alexander the Great, and all the way through today to Putin. Nobody would argue that Joe Biden isn't a nice guy. He is a nice guy. The question, and Neville Chamberlain was a nice guy. The question is, in the world of leaders as they are, should we really default to peace and sanctions and discussions and conversations, or is that merely a sign of weakness to the small percentage, or media, at least small but significant percentage of leaders who would see that as a sign of weakness and then try to destroy and take more power, as Putin is doing for whatever reasons? Those are my riffings on war and peace. Now about suicide, as I said at the top of the show. It's funny calling this a show. It feels too flippant, I must say. I'd rather call it a program or whatever. Anyway, 70%, according to the American, I want to get it right, so I'm not going to exaggerate in any way. The American Foundation for the Prevention of Suicide found that as 2020, the latest year studied, that the rate of suicide is highest in middle-aged white men. And in 2020, men died by suicide 3.88 times more than women. White males accounted for 69.68% of suicide deaths in 2020. And yet we don't hear about it. Because there is such a focus on women and people of color, especially what they call BIPOCs, not Asians anymore, or Filipinos, but black and indigenous is what they care about. They, meaning the media, which largely speaks in one voice. That is what engenders groupthink. If women have a deficit that's even much smaller, let's say they are underrepresented in engineering. For the last 20 years, we've seen billions and billions of dollars at redress and billions of, frankly, reverse discrimination where they say we want a woman engineer here. But when men have the ultimate deficit, overall they die 5 years younger. And here, the latest statistic that 70% of all suicide deaths, are white males. Nobody even hears about it, let alone seems to do much about it. And that rate has been increasing, while other groups have increased much more slowly or decreased. That's, for me, a profound example of the groupthink that we are forced into because of the monolithic thinking of most of the mainstream media. They like to talk about Fox News or right-wing radio, but those take a tiny mind share of the public compared with CNN, New York Times, NBC, PBS, ABC, LA Times, Washington Post, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and maybe most invidious, Google search, which really is, from where I sit, very biased toward liberal search results. Because when I use, for example, Yahoo search, I get a very different set of search results on any politically related topic. Anything where there could be a liberal versus conservative position, which I'm describing as, in many ways, reduced to redistribution. Anything that favors the haves is going to be a conservative position. Anything that favors the have-nots, the disabled, the poor, the Palestinians, African Americans, that's a liberal position. And it's remarkable how much of the media reporting in books, TV, radio, even entertainment media, movies, sitcoms, plays, represent an advocacy for that redistribution from the haves, independent of merit, to the have-nots. That's groupthink, and that's ultimately scary. Because there is a solid argument, maybe not a dispositive argument, that can be made for the argument that our resources should be allocated to those most likely to enhance humankind, to improve humankind, not necessarily those with the greatest deficit. That was the Marxist view, from those with the greatest ability to those with the greatest need. But is that ultimately what's wise? Normally, when you think about it, if you owned 5 solar farms, and one had been a great producer of solar energy, and the worst one had produced very little, well, there's a deficit. Do you put your additional investing of your dollars into the one that has produced the least solar energy or the most? Now, of course, there's many other factors that get in the way, but all things equal, what's we're doing now? It's almost a visceral belief without sufficient reflection that our dollars and our efforts and our time and our attention and our beliefs are wisely focused on redistributing to those who have at least historically contributed the least or less than those who have contributed the most. Because people are not wealthy, unlike what you see in the movies. Most people are not wealthy because they were cheats. There's cheating on all sides, but in toto, people who have made money or companies made money because other people are willing to part with their hard-earned dollars to get that product or service that they believe offered value. And to take money away from those people, the people who did create the COVID vaccines and who created the iPhone and who created a wonderful TV show and who wonderfully created this webcam and that I'm looking at you right now and enabled me to share with you whatever I have to share. Amazing, thanks to YouTube, which is Google, and Logitech that makes these wonderful webcams. And taxing them more means more resources are going to go to what government says they want to do, which is let's just say the have-nots. Cosmically, is that wise? Short term, is it feel good? Yes. Is it virtue signaling? Absolutely. Quote, virtue signaling. But is it ultimately wise, especially in the long term? We decry corporations for short-term thinking. But long term, is it really wise to allocate more dollars, more human effort to those who have contributed less than those who have contributed more? To reward those who have contributed less and punish by increased taxation those who have contributed more. One of the few truisms in psychology is you get more of what you reward and less of what you punish. So if you punish the society's contributors, that is those who pay the most taxes because they made the most income, and you reward those who have paid the least taxes, who are contributed less, what are you going to get more of? Is long term, is that going to be good for society? Not from where I sit. It's probably a good time for a break. I'm Marty Nemko. I don't need a break. I just assume keep up my... there's an announcer who says she'd like to take a break in the middle of the show and announce what she's listening to, what we're listening to, etc. So stay with me. After we come back, I'm going to talk about some pretty unconventional, but I think hopefully wise thoughts about relationships, whether it's wise to talk about your problems or not, COVID, work ethic, the value of praise, of not the value of, but the limitations of expecting praise from others, some thoughts about meeting, weight management, and coffee, which I just had a cup of before I came on here, so maybe I'm speaking too fast. I apologize. I hope you'll stay with me. Thank you for staying with me. I'm riffing on various issues that are important to me and I hope of interest to you. Next, I want to talk about relationships. As children, of course, we saw fairy tales with Sleeping Beauty and Prince Charming, and they lived happily ever after. But even in adulthood, we want this, the triumph of hope over experience. We may have dated and realized that life isn't perfect, relationships are far from perfect, but we kind of hope for the dream marriage. And partly that's fueled by the fact that on Facebook, every couple you see is cavorting in warm waters and happy and all good news. Well, in the real world, after the infatuation stage, there is tremendous difference. There are unrealistic expectations. One partner will expect much more immersion, much more willingness to process, much more tolerance of failings. And I have found that the best relationships are those where each person really strives to have a rich individual life, both in their work life and in their hobbies and their interests, so that they're not too dependent on the other, because it's just not realistic to have that level of Siamese immersion, Siamese twin immersion. So if your relationship is troubled and you're wanting more from your partner, ask yourself whether a wiser approach might be to say, how can I enrich my individual life? Talking about my own marriage, I've been with my wife for many years. What has made it work well, our marriage is not made in heaven, but it works on earth, is that we really do have strong individual lives, strong individual work lives, individualized hobbies. Barbara loves to travel, I don't. Barbara likes to dance, I don't. I love to work in the garden, she doesn't. I love to write, and I work long hours, 70 hours a week. That's not quite who she is. She works very long, but not crazy like me. We honor that. We respect that. That mutuality of respect is core. And when we feel like doing something together, we do it. We do like hanging out together. We do like watching movies and TV on our TV in the TV room when hugging the dog. We do like playing gin rummy. We've been playing gin rummy for 40 years. We keep a lifetime score. I'm up $400, which we never a dollar will change hands. But it's comforting. It's a wonderful ritual. We laugh. We listen to music on our Alexa while we're playing. So we come together when it's mutually wise and respect each other enough to have separate lives. And that's what all I want to say about relationships. Talking out your problems. It may seem odd for a guy who's got a PhD in educational psychology to believe that talking out your problems is overrated. Of course, sometimes you should talk out your problems, especially if you're trying to brainstorm a solution. But very often people just want to talk, to be vented, to vent, to be heard, to process. I often find that that's worse than not talking about it at all. Because what it does is there's no solutions that come, but the problem ends up being more top of mind. Sure, you get it off your chest for a moment, but it stays top of mind and continues to bother you more. So I would invite you to think twice, 3 times, 4 times before you decide you want to process your problem, talk about your problem, whether it be with your partner or the professional, a therapist or whatever. Ask yourself whether the wiser thing might be to journal briefly about it or talk briefly about it or think briefly about it and then take baby steps forward. And if there's nothing you can do about it, distract yourself with something productive or fun. That's all I want to say about talking about your problems, COVID. We all wish and hope that with Omicron, it's while it's more contagious, it's weaker. But as I read this not only the public information that we see in the mass media, but I subscribe to something called Doximity, which goes to medical professionals, because I taught until recently at the medical school at UCSF. I get it, and it appears that there's even now something called Deltacron, which as most of the insiders predicted, the insider scientists, this is going to keep mutating. And in fact, the Spanish flu didn't die out. It just kept mutating, and we developed vaccines, and so every year we do a vaccine. There's still 50,000 people die a year every year from the flu. It doesn't appear to be dying out, and I think there is consensus that it is too early to be, as the politicians are doing, because they're feeling the pressure, opening things up. I don't think it's time for that yet. Now, maybe in certain jurisdictions in which there is very low incidence, then the risk-reward ratio of opening up is fine. I'm not saying a lockdown of all businesses or anything like that. But I think it's premature, especially given the transmissibility of both Omicron and now Deltacron, which is just starting, and it may not be a big thing. I just want to give you an idea of, that these things, it's not over. It continues to mutate. That you'd be wise to take reasonable precautions, avoiding large groups if you can indoors. Outdoors, you're fine. Masks provide an incremental protection for others and a bit for yourself. It doesn't hurt for you to wear the mask and I'm not necessarily saying, I'm not a scientist here, I'm just armchairing. The incremental advantage of the N95 versus a good quality other mask may not be that great given the uncomfortability and restriction of breathing, especially when you're exercising or walking. But taking little measured steps. One of the silver linings of COVID for my wife and I is we love to go out to eat, but we really make a point of trying to eat outside. We've cheated a couple of times and eaten inside because we don't want to be that restricted. But in general, we opt to eat outside. The heat lamps are getting better and better, and there are more of them, and that way we get the pleasure of eating out. And outside is often more pleasant than a buzzy, loud inside restaurant. So I'm just merely asking you to not think that our wishes for COVID to be dying should be matched by a behavior that takes us back to normal. Because unfortunately, at least from where I sit, as a non-MD, I'm stressing that, but as a fairly careful observer, I don't think COVID is not over yet. I don't think anybody knows whether there's going to be a major resurgence, a minor resurgence, mild tapering off. I don't think anybody knows. I'm pretty sure that nobody knows for sure. Even the real experts, when I read Nature, which is the most prestigious set of publications for academics, they're not sure. They're hypotheses, but nobody knows. Okay, about work ethic. Everybody says, how the hell, why are you're an old guy. How the hell are you working 70 hours a week? Why are you not burned out? Why are you not wanting to play golf? It's the last thing in the world I want to do. I love the statement by Isaac Asimov, who had already written 450 books. I've only written 15. He's written 450 books. He wrote 450 books. And he was asked in an interview, what would you do if you knew you had 6 months to live? And he said, type faster. Exactly how I feel. I wouldn't want to do it die in front of a client. That would make it pretty yucky for the client. But I want to work until I can. I like to think that I'm at my very best now, but I know that I'll be 72 in June, and that can't last. So I work 70 hours a week to try to be as contributory as I can. That's why I'm making this. That's why I do these podcasts. That's why I make other YouTube videos. That's why I write all these articles. So, and it comes from this feeling that the meaning of life is defined by how much you contribute. I hate that because I know it sounds sanctimonious, but I'm trying to be honest with you, even if I appear sanctimonious. My honest feeling is that life well led is defined primarily by how productive you are, how ethically productive you are. And that's why I work so much. And to be maximally productive, you got to use your best skills. I have weaknesses, like everybody. I can't draw more than stick figures. I can't fix anything. But I can think on my feet, verbally and in writing. And I know something about practical things of life, career, relationships, money, the stuff we're talking about here. And so I spend as much time as I can using my best skills, trying to ethically be productive. YouTube videos, articles, books, etc. I just wrote a little booklet. I like short form. I wrote a book that was as long as 774 pages, but I come to believe that short is what works in the real world if I really care about making a difference and I don't care about prestige. So I wrote a book called My Commandments. It's $4. It's a little booklet. It's $3 on Kindle, $4 paperback, short form. But I spent a lot of time doing it. I was up till midnight every night after clients and after writing I had to do, working on that because it feels contributory. It's using my best skills. I invite you to make that primary and you won't be procrastinating so much. That's going to help you. That's going to help you motivate you to be. You won't want to. I never want to procrastinate. Almost never, except when I'm doing my taxes, which I'm doing now. I'm sitting in piles. I'd rather do this. Anyway, okay, enough about work ethic. Praise. We all want to be recognized. We all want to be praised. But too often, either because people are busy or they're selfish or they're afraid that if you praise them, if they praise you, you're going to ask for more money or whatever or more of their time. Praise is hard to come by, generally, unless they want something from you. So don't surrender your agency. Don't surrender control. You have to rely on yourself for that attaboy or attagirl. When I finish, it's funny, I do this just automatically now. Whenever I finish an article or I'll be finishing this, if I felt I did okay, and so far I think I'm doing okay, when I press stop and I upload it to YouTube, I'll say, good job, Marty. And that's it. And I expect nothing. Do I want to look on the comments and see a lot of thumbs up and no thumbs down and positive comment? Of course I do. But I don't expect it. I have to rely on my own self-praise for feeling good about what I do, because too rarely do we get recognition from others. Okay, next, what do I want to talk about now? Meetings. There are too many meetings. We are in an era that values collaboration, connection, teamwork, consensus. We, not me, there's no I in team, all in, together. But the truth is that all those meetings ending up being an enormous waste of time. They're asynchronous, means they all at the same time, everybody's got to stop, even if it's a Zoom meeting. They got to stop what they're doing and sit in there and listen to what is often self-aggrandizing dog and pony shows and other BS to try to impress the boss or denigrate somebody else. And strategic planning meetings may be the worst, because they end up all sounding the same. We want to have world-class while being ethical and our valuing our workers, our employees. They spend all this time and money, sometimes incredible amounts of money, on stupid strategic planning consultants, only to say the obvious or that which is not going to be followed because the realities of the world make being so pure impossible. So if you're the person who's in charge of potentially calling a meeting, pull on ropes of restraint and ask yourself, should I just send a group email and ask them for input? Should I have maybe reduce my meetings to once a month or a brief stand-up meeting, a 15 or 20-minute stand-up meeting instead of those 2-hour things? And if you're going to schedule it, a little tip is schedule it right before lunch, because then people are, the meetings tend to expand and get larger. But if it's lunchtime, people are hungry, schedule it for 11:40, 12 o'clock lunchtime, they'll be more likely to stay within the agenda. And do send an agenda in advance with a crisp, tight agenda, asking for input for each of the agenda items. Enough about meetings. Weight management. I have utterly failed at that. I don't know why. It's not that I love food that much. I like food. But I can't, and I've written tons of articles about it. And I used to think the best advice is to, try to incrementally change and just cut back a little. Be conscious as you're eating. Don't eat until you're full. Keep bad foods out of the house, like calorie-dense stuff like nuts and cheese and like chocolate, ice cream. You know what? I don't stay with it at all. And I'm a pretty damn disciplined person. So it may be comforting to you, at least to know that this guy who's very disciplined in most things has utterly failed. So if you've been unsuccessful in your weight management or frankly even substance abuse or whatever, maybe you got to forgive yourself. We're human. There's not everything we can do. And the last thing I want to talk about is coffee. And like I said, I had a cup of coffee before I started this. I love it. I'm a kind of a sad person by nature. Puts me in a better mood, gives me more energy, increases circulation in the brain, so probably my IQ is a couple of points higher. Just gives me a sense of well-being. And all the evidence is for most people, a cup or two, or even three sometimes, of coffee a day is good for you. Apparently it reduces Alzheimer's risk or diabetes risk, or I don't know, I haven't followed it carefully. A long time since I read it. But, even from very authoritative sources like Mayo Clinic or whatever, coffee's pretty good for you if you like it, which I do. In any event, those are my thoughts on Putin and war, and unfortunately worrying that, in fact, history shows us that might does make right too often. My head shaking about why, even though white males comprise 70% of all suicide deaths, nobody seems to know about it, less seems to care. I definitely worry about the groupthink in society that is fueled by a media, the schools, colleges, and media that are basically speaking of one voice. It is one of my more deeply held beliefs that there is wisdom that comes from the left and the right across the political spectrum, and that only full dimension thinking is likely to lead to the best outcomes. But we live in an era where only left is considered right, and that, I think, is very dangerous. Relationships, too many of us, even as adults, have a fairy tale view of what relationships are supposed to be like. And in fact, the best approach to relationships is each of you having a rich individual life and only coming together when it's mutually feeling good and respecting that individuality of the other person. Regarding talking about your problems, too often talking about your problems merely keeps it more top of mind. It's exercising that worry muscle, makes you feel more victimized. Very often the best you can do is just to journal about it, maybe briefly talk about it, and then try to distract yourself with something positive. COVID, I'm afraid it's premature to say the pandemic is ending, becoming a mild endemic. There's too much going on. There's even a Deltacron new variant that was first identified just a month or two ago that appears to be spreading slowly. It's too early to stay cautious. Don't be crazy and don't put yourself in a bubble necessarily, especially if you're not you have many comorbidities. If you're unvaccinated, and you do get vaccinated, there is still some value in vaccination, although the evidence is that it's waning, even if you've been double vaccinated and boosted. But it's still worth getting vaccinated, even though you could be sick for a day or two. I believe, again, that's just armchair. I'm not sure I'm right. I don't know. Work ethic, foundationally believing that using your best skills to be productive and help the world ethically is core to the life well led, and if that is foundational to you, you're going to work. You're not going to be as likely to procrastinate. Don't rely on praise from other people. You're too rarely going to get it. You're going to have more agency, more self-efficacy if you praise yourself for work well done, as well as being candid with yourself about areas you need to improve. Meetings, too many meetings, especially strategic planning meetings, that too often end up being either pie in the sky or platitudinous. Weight management, like other kind of problems like that, it's a lot easier to prescribe solutions than to follow them. Even somebody like me who's very disciplined, I cannot seem to manage. My weight is not terrible. I'm 5'11" and 185. I'm fine. I'm not bad. But believe me, I should be 15 pounds thinner, and I can't do it. Just when I had coffee, I didn't just have coffee. I had a really delicious scone, one of Debbie Anderson's Victorian House scones, which is to die for, but they're very calorific, filled with butter. And then coffee, which I do think is a really remarkable, low, lots of benefit, little risk, low calories, mood improving, maybe even IQ improving thing. So anyway, that's it. I like to end all these podcasts with the same message, which I believe is more relevant now than ever before, or not ever, I can't say that, but then I can recall in my lifetime, and that is this. And it didn't come from me. I don't remember the name of the person who wrote it. We find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't. I'm Marty Nemko. Okay, I do thank you for watching. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share if you share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. And in any event, I do thank you for watching. I'm Marty Nimko.